Regular.
Regular.
I heard something else. Okay. Congress over the summer when they were really sort of ramping up the discussion. Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of AutoBlack. If this is your first time joining us, welcome to your new favorite podcast. If you've been with us before and you're back again, welcome back. AutoBlack is a podcast hosted by 5 Black architects, and we get on here and we talk about pretty much whatever we want, from architecture to politics to culture, and we do it through the perspective of 5 Black architects. I'm, of course, one of your hosts. My name is Robert. We also have with us Perla.
Hi.
We have Whitney.
Hi.
We have Jamar.
What it do? Where you at, X?
We're supposed to have X,
Where you
but
at, X?
he is holding the cultural stereotype of not being on time. So he may or may not be here with us. I don't know. But nonetheless, we are here. We're back. Before we get started, because this episode we're actually picking up. This is a part 2 of an interesting discussion that we had last week about NIMBYism, and really started to get into some of the geopolitical landscape and a very major development that's going on in Baltimore City. And so we thought it'd be interesting for us to continue that conversation with a part 2. But I also recognize the platform that we're on. And I think it's important that we, honor that platform and understand that our words have power. And so I want to address a comment that was said last week. And it's a comment that really didn't age well. And so it's actually a comment that Jamar made, and I want to set the record straight because he made the comment about at that time Drake was winning the beef between Kendrick Lamar, and that comment obviously didn't age well because K Dot
OVO.
BBL Drizzy
K Dot had to go and shoot a bodyguard. That's weak. That's weak. Fight with words. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's what Drake was saying.
Well, they did spoken like a true loser.
Yeah, that didn't age well, Jamar. But I just thought it'd be important to address that. We wanna set the record straight and be a podcast that respects the platform that we're on.
Y'all some clout chasers. I'm a realist.
No.
But like I said, we're actually going to be continue on in the part 2 of our discussion, and we really got into a real interesting topic, concerning NIMBYism as a whole, and we really looked at sort of a real life project that both me and Jamar are familiar with just because of our proximity to it, the Baltimore Inner Harbor, and Jamar, being the good citizen that he is, he's actually been participating in a lot of community forums and a lot of community discussions, and actually participating in a lot of the dialogue that's been going on. And so, just to sort of kind of pick us back up, Jamar, it would probably be interesting if you actually kind of share some of that perspective and some of that dialogue that you've been involved in, and just what I know we talked about it from our perspective, sitting here on sort of the design side and the critiquing side, but like, can you share a little bit about what the dialogue and the conversation has been on the forefront on the ground?
Yeah, so basically, AIA Baltimore had held a panel that was supposed to be not necessarily a critique or a um, panel towards like speaking directly about the impact that the Inner Harbor proposal will have for the city, but it was basically a panel saying like this is what could happen with the Inner Harbor if various funds were allocated and used in the right way. So, just a quick, brief kind of recap about what we talked about or what they talked about at the panel. It was 5 people from various professions. I think it was a landscape architect, a traffic engineer, an architect, an environmental scientist, and a economist. And so they basically all went up and spoke about various things. So the architect was basically went through the history of Baltimore, how important the inner harbor had been as a actually working harbor, and how after the ships moved out and all the warehouses and all that stuff moved out from the inner harbor to various other locations in the suburbs, how the city struggled to kind of reinvent itself and kind of revitalize the harbor. The economists kind of came at it in an interesting way with saying that, like, obviously any type of development for any project in any city needs some type of money, right? Some type of funding source. And that, because of Baltimore City's population loss over the past couple of years or past couple of decades, the county side of Baltimore County actually it's easier to develop in that city because they don't need to have as many subsidies as it is to have in Baltimore City because of the tax rate here in Baltimore City to make up for the population loss. The landscape architect talked about how there's different projects across the country that have used the money that the current developer is asking for, which I think is $400 million. Don't quote me on that, but he's asking that from the city to finance the project or help finance the project. And they were talking about different projects, landscape projects in across the country that has used money in similar ways and less money in similar ways to revitalize areas. So that was an interesting conversation to see what that instead of it going towards I think however tall that building will be, the 25 to 30-story apartment high rise, how that money could be used for public infrastructure versus going towards more the private side of things. The traffic engineer was, I hate to say it was pointless. He was a pointless person. We all know traffic is bad on those streets. So he was like, yeah, has actually gone down. Yeah, I'm like, COVID happened. The another thing I'll say about the economists really quickly though is that the economist said that it's you can't really predict what the new normal is since COVID has happened. So the previous projections about like office use and retail, all that's changing because of e-commerce and everything. So we haven't hit a new normal to project what could be a great way to revitalize the inner harbor. But that was another thing. And then the last one was the environmental scientist. He was actually pretty cool. He was just saying like there's different ways to kind of like break that edge of the inner harbor, which is a pretty harsh defining edge of like it's concrete and it's just water, it just drops off, right? So how can we soften that with some type of environmental, sustainable, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically sustainable design that can help hold up with global warming and stuff like that. So it was an interesting conversation. It did seem like it was a pro. It was it was against the current developers' plans from everybody that was on that panel. But again, everybody has their opinions about the Inner Harbor. So that's a recap.
Um, Jamar, do you know if they did like a water study, or showed some sort of study of like what the water rise level may be at the harbor? And I'm using the water study that they did for Boston when Seaport was developing and stuff, and they showed like how the water sea levels when it rises, how it will impact Seaport. And so, like, did they show any like potential impact in terms of what it means to be at the harbor and the or I guess the study between the sea levels versus that water shoreline there?
Not really. It was honestly, it was a jam packed event. I think it was only supposed to go for an hour, and five people talking for an hour. It's just like us trying to talk for an hour. Like it took it. They couldn't touch everything. Yeah.
Okay.
So the environmental
So
science.
there wasn't like a deep Okay, so there wasn't like a deep dive in terms of climate and how it impacts that.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, it wasn't that deep. And again, it wasn't supposed to specifically talk about the site. It was talking about potentials to like other potentials that could happen at the site, along with whatever
Okay.
they're proposing. But again, it wasn't supposed to be a direct critique of the proposal.
And
Okay.
I've actually come across a lot of negative comments on the proposal, from architects who work in the city, and obviously lay people who are just you know inhabitants of the city. And my argument, and we kind of got into this last week. My argument for the proposal is not necessarily, I thought the design as being a secondary or even tertiary, in terms of importance of when looking at the proposal, because to me it was the impact that that type of development can have, the infusion of population, the infusion of resources, the infusion of tax base to actually create infrastructural opportunity for the inner harbor and beyond, because I think that's something that Baltimore really lacks. And it's interesting to me that a lot of the comments that I see, everybody saying, no development, no buildings, just make it a park. And like that kind of commentary to me, you don't really understand that just making it a park doesn't solve the issue in the long run. Furthermore, I even argued that the site, because of its proximity and location to the CBD,
Central Business
it
District.
can't be a park, because then it won't support itself. It won't be self sustaining. Like
So
a and I know you use the Brooklyn Bridge Park as an example, but even that was subsidized by a hotel building that helps to subsidize and maintain that.
so really quickly, because a lot of people, on this podcast don't really know the history of like development in the city. So Baltimore again has been losing population probably since the 1970s, which happened probably after white flight and everything. But it's constantly been losing a population. And one thing that the city has constantly tried to do is infuse money and development in the city. And so there's a place called Charles Center that they talked about which is kind of like in the central business district, as Rob was talking about, and it was supposed to spur development, and it kind of did, but it didn't. It wasn't sustained, and I feel like the people of Baltimore, or at least some people in Baltimore, feel like they've seen so much public money go towards things that have said, "Oh, we going to be like this is going to be the thing that changes the city," and it hasn't done it in 30, 40, 50 years. So when you hear that constantly, it makes you question every decision that comes into the city, because it's like, hey, it hasn't benefited us in the past, so why should we like just wholeheartedly jump head first into this new proposal just because it looks pretty and has nice renderings.
Hmm.
That's an interesting point, and I don't disagree with that at all. And just some of the other comments that I was looking at, and I've even asked the question, to what extent is a lot of the negative. So, as someone, I've been in the development industry for almost 2 years, and I've had to actually do a lot of these community engagement events and actually sit there and receive a lot of the negative comments, right? And one of the things that I've found is that typically the people who typically there's more overwhelming support than there is not, especially if you're transforming a very unbeneficial use to something that is beneficial and useful and actually is transformative. But typically, the people who will come out at those community events are the ones that's going to be the naysayers. And a lot of times, they don't even actually live directly adjacent to the project. They're usually more than a throwing stones away
Robert
from the
Rooms.
actual area of impact. I'm going to ignore that comment. But
I live a throne straight. I can walk to the inner harbor.
good, 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 good.
I can walk there. Can you walk there? Can you take public transportation there?
I can.
You have to drive your car, right? You have to take the interstate. You have to.
Nah, I just jump right on
Can
the.
you walk? Can you walk to public transportation, or you have to take your car?
Why is you hating? Why is you being a
Cause you sitting there
hater?
talking about, oh, the naysayers. They actually don't live. You like this project, but you don't even live in the city.
First of all, I lived in the city for several years before I ended up
But
moving.
you left. You part of the population decline.
But anyways, anyways, um, but again, a lot of times the people who are the negative opponents, they're not directly adjacent or even live in the area of impact. And just looking at some of the comments, and I've went on a little deep dive on some Reddit comments about the inner harbor design, and just kind of I get a sense that a lot of people who are the type of don't disturb my view, don't disturb my open space, are people who don't even live within walking distance of the inner
Well,
harbor.
Rob, you know me and the questions, so here I come. So, those people who don't live in the inner harbor, and this is part of my ignorance to Baltimore and its economy, but if someone's living around the harbor right now, that means that they can afford to live there, right? And so I guess if the people who aren't directly adjacent to the harbor but still want their voice to be heard, and the only reason why they don't live adjacent in the harbor is because of the economic, disparities in the city, can we blame them for wanting to still voice their opinion on a city that, they have families in, and they have, past generations that have history in this area? And I was reading on the blog here too. It was called the largest population Freedomsport. And so there is some sort of tie to the history of Black people in this area as well. And so, I mean, I I just wonder, can we fault them for still voicing their opinion, even if it is negative and against, the development along the harbor?
No, not at all. I mean, I don't. I'm not saying that those folks should not have their opinions made. Um, but I am what I am also saying is that, again, one of the things that I find that is an issue with Baltimore City now is that there isn't nobody living downtown, because
Oh.
it is sort of the old prototype of a central business district where it's office building, it's retail, it's hotel. And as Jamar alluded to, with COVID, how COVID has actually changed the economics of things, that those uses don't work anymore. And so not only does Baltimore have a history of people leaving the city for decades, um, a lot of the way that the downtown was also sort of created, based, especially in a place like Baltimore, was based off of race. So it was kind of, when white flight was occurring, like it was made to just be a place to work, and then you go home to your suburbs. And so now here we are, generations after that, where we have to dramatically relook at what the future of the city looks like. And I think, just my perspective, that part of the Inner Harbor proposal, what should be required or what's necessary, is actually bringing people to the harbor, not just as a place of attraction, but as a place of like residence.
Hmm. Hmm.
At the community meetings
But
that you both spoke about, because you're saying, the people who are generally naysayers aren't in the area, do you get their addresses, or I guess like where they live, like neighborhood wise? Or is this kind of like based off of what they say in the meeting itself?
you talking about meetings that I've been a part of?
Yeah, I think Jamar mentioned some community meetings too.
Yeah, so a lot of the comments have been on Facebook, right? Like social media. That's where a lot of the comments are coming
Okay.
from, as well as news clippings, but also just from the couple that I've been to, they have been bussed in from various locations, and usually they're elderly. Like actually, the panel that I went to was I literally thought I was in a retirement center. Literally, they were all gray haired. Like I literally thought I was in the wrong location because there was nobody under 65 there. I swear to you, there was nobody. I like besides my coworkers and I, we were the only people that were under 65 that went to this panel discussion. And I can't remember exactly where they were bused from. Apparently, I heard that they were bused from Roland Park, which is north of this, like in the northern, not northern section. It's kind of like northern section of the city.
Which
And
is
then
a
there's also,
historically affluent
yeah,
neighborhood in the city.
yeah, and again from coworkers, because I didn't stay for the actual Q&A because it went longer. So there were some individuals who spoke up, but a lot of the people who did speak up didn't even have necessarily comments or criticisms of what the panel had talked about. They just basically were saying like how much they enjoyed the Inner Harbor and hate how it's turning out now. And
Mm-hmm.
again, this is from what I heard from coworkers. I didn't hear that from word of mouth, but I do know there is a senior living facility that is like literally across the street from the harbor. There is a newer apartment building that was recently completed that's located on in the harbor, and the rest of the Inner Harbor is mainly office and some retail. There used to be a big mall that was across the street from the Inner Harbor that closed down, I think pre-COVID. or maybe during COVID. And then there's a smaller community called Federal Hill that's on the other side of the harbor. That so it is a community on the harbor, but it's not closer to the where they're going to do the new redevelopment. And then there's also another community that's a more affluent uh, community called Harbor East, Harbor Point East, Harbor East, Harbor East. Um, so there's pockets of residential around it, but directly adjacent to the site, there's
Mm,
not really too much residential. It's mainly offices and some retail.
Yeah,
gotcha.
and just to be clear, um, a, a lot of the reaction that I'm responding to is things that I've seen in the comments and on the
Mm,
blog post. And so it's also me just kind of reading in between the lines and trying to fill in the gaps, which is, in the age of social media that we live in, is not the best way to come to a consensus.
mhm,
But in going with that, just me reading in between the lines, I had this interesting thought, and I don't know to what extent of it is actually true, but obviously we know that NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and a lot of what I was looking at was like people taking up ownership of the inner harbor, and don't remove my park space, um, don't don't develop in my backyard, essentially, but then also because the developer, who has been doing a lot of public face campaign, doing a lot of public appearances, really trying to be the face, is a Baltimore native from West Baltimore. He's also black. And again, just me reading in between the lines, I wonder if some of the vitriol of some of the comments that I've seen is because he's black. And then
mm,
so not only how dare you develop my park, but how dare this black man come through here with this $900 million redevelopment in my city?
mhm,
I don't know. Maybe that's a stretch, but it was something that kind of made me just, scratch my head a little bit in
mm.
wonder and curiosity.
Hmm.
So weren't you the type of person that said to Perla a couple of times or somebody on this podcast, you like, oh, you doing some yoga over there? I think you're doing down dog.
That was
No,
to
let me.
me. I've got it several times.
I think you're doing down. I think you're doing some salutations over there, some suns. No, I'm joking. I also think it's interesting too.
I might be.
You probably are. But I also think it's interesting too that the architects on the project aren't local as well. They are from the Nordic country. I think they're Swedish or Finnish or one of those countries. So it's not even like an American or a Maryland-based architect. They're from across the pond. So that could also be a reason for it. Um, who knows?
Mm,
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. When I was looking at the images, I thought it could be any other location in the country. I wondered what about it screamed Baltimore. Like, what about it made me want to go to Baltimore and visit it, aside from the waterfront, which honestly looked like the waterfront in DC. And yes, it. I mean, there's differences in like forms and shapes and stuff, but nothing really was standing out to me that was just like, wow, I really want to go visit Baltimore, you know. But yeah, that's kind of where I landed with that.
Yeah, I mean, you could also say the same thing about any architect going in and building a high rise in New York, or a statement building. It like, what about that screams New York? I mean,
I think a lot of it has to do with, well, if we're using New York, New York is more than just their buildings though, right? It's the congestion, it's the dirty air, it's the pop
the rats.
sorry. It's the people, it's the pollution, it's the trains. Like it's the greediness of New York in general. And so maybe if there was more light shed on what Baltimore has, like what characteristics Baltimore has,
Yeah,
maybe more about the history of um I forgot what it was called, the Freedom Port. Maybe more, enlightenment about that. Um, Kind of just putting it out there of why it is the developer wants to kind of beautify the whole waterfront in this area.
So if we were to
Yeah.
do that in Baltimore, there would be Squeegee Boy Central. There will be nothing but Tuesdays and avenues, and it just. But no, in all seriousness, so Baltimore, from what I understand in my short time being here, is a foodie city. My big thing is like let's
Mhm.
put some type of like small, and I know I think maybe Rob and I we talked about this last time. I'm like, let's put some small like Whitney, you know, when we was in Copenhagen, we went to that little area that had a whole bunch of food, that was in like containers. Like that to me was pretty cool. Is I mean, maybe we're not copying another place, but let's
Mhm.
celebrate its foodie history. Like, you know, it's seafood. That's what screams Baltimore. Um, that's all I got. I'm still new.
I think too, like it's
Yeah,
hard to
which
compare like putting a building in New York versus creating a master plan for an area. Like that's hard to compare because a building you could place it anywhere and you could say, oh, it like relates to the context, or we're just saying F the context. But master plan is like it has to
Mm.
me a good master plan relates to the context of the area and relates to what they want the future to be like. And what it sounds like is like I think it would be great they could do something like the containers in Copenhagen. But in order for that to be successful, you need development in that area for people to want to even come to it. I feel like if you start off too small, then
Well,
there's
that's
no way for it to grow in the best way possible.
Well, that's the interesting thing about the harbor is that there was less development, and we Rob and I we talked about this last time, but there was less development around the harbor, and they had more things going on back in like the '80s and the maybe even up into the '90s, but '70s, '80s, and '90s. The area that they're developing now has always been kind of like a public fairground space until they put the pavilions there, and I believe in like the '80s or the '90s, and even the pavilion spaces were like shops. So yes, they were privatized, but they were shops for the public. It
Mm.
was retail space so that people can go in and do certain things. But yeah, they used to have like the city fair there. There was just a lot of public gathering spaces that space has always been kind of dedicated for. And now that they want to, put apartments there, I feel like people are feeling like they're kind of taking away a gathering space that Baltimore has.
But are people
which
gathering there
I think
now?
that the
Actually, it's funny because like I say that they don't gather there, but I went out for there was a wine village that's been there for a month. It actually just finished on Memorial Day, but a lot of people actually do go out there. It's tough at night. Don't get me wrong, them kids are wild, but during the day, and again, it's I can't say it's activated like it used to be because the pavilions aren't what they used to be,
Mm-hmm.
but they do have some activities that happen pretty frequently out there along the harbor. It's probably a shell of itself, yeah, but there's still some, especially because it's also near the Camden Yards baseball stadium, so that also activates that as well.
And in your opinion, Jamar, do you feel like those activities that now exist can fit within the context of the proposal?
It probably will because I don't think it's developing on the land that it currently occupies because it's basically infilling what was the pavilions. Um,
Oh, okay.
so it won't necessarily take away from that, but I think a lot of people are
Mm.
just, and again, I could be putting words in people's mouths, but it feels like a lot of people feel like it's an attack on that public space. Because another thing, quickly, because I know we're running out of time, but a lot of the inner harbor is kind of like a brick. I wouldn't say it's bricked off, but if you go to the Federal Hill part of the inner harbor walkway, it's pretty bricked off. It doesn't feel inviting. There's not really much place to sit. The inner harbor itself has some seating it's somewhat inadequate, honestly, compared to other places I've been to. And yeah, so I feel like when you take away some of the places that people can sit, people start to feel like it doesn't feel like it's theirs anymore.
Mm.
well, I even think that that's a much more elaborate and focused discussion because you can argue that the limited amount of public seating also corresponds with Baltimore's homeless population or unhoused population, and really trying to control and monitor who patronizes a place. Um, so I think that that's kind of a separate conversation. But I will say, if you actually really look at the proposal, the actual building footprint that they're proposing is relatively small. So there is still a lot of park space, and there's still a lot of green space. There's still a lot of opportunity for serendipitous um, um, serendipitous in community
Is the word too big for you?
activities. Um, yeah, serendipitous. Um, but what I think, and it's hard because obviously the Harbor Place pavilions that are there, there's probably nostalgia there, but it was also developed at a time when like shopping malls were new, indoor shopping malls were an experience, and the original developer of the Harbor Place, one could argue, James Rouse, that he is uh the creator of the shopping mall. Like there's him and another person. There's a debate of like who actually created the first mall. So I think that there's this need for the Harbor Place to kind of jump into the modern century and where we are now, and also meet the needs of where the city is now. The need is housing. That's everywhere. And there be a component of affordability that's there. The need is infrastructural improvement. And I think that this helps to address that.
The last,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
I'd also be in. Oops, sorry, Jamar.
Oh, the last thing I want to say though is that the housing that will be built won't be. I mean, yeah, it'll be a portion of it affordable, but you gotta remember also a lot of people in Baltimore has like just pothole ridden streets. So a lot of people like they're like that money could go somewhere else, right? Like
But how do you subsidize it? How do you subsidize affordability?
by making the overall city better. Why focus just on one area when there's multiple parts of the city that needs the same amount of improvement? You know.
So yeah, so just because a lot of people argue, well, why don't you make it affordable, more affordable? Why just partially affordable? Well, what you have to understand is that at the cost of construction and the cost of development, you don't get affordable construction. It's still going to be the same cost per unit, and so it's the high end, if you will, market rate unit types that actually help to subsidize and offset to make certain components of the project affordable.
I
It
guess
sounds like we
too, like,
need rich people, huh? Like we need them.
well, I guess we could argue too that yes, you can make housing affordable or a portion of it, but we also need to increase people's wages. So that's more of a societal economic issue as well. Uh, because
Mhm,
then people could afford to live in places like that if they were getting paid more.
Right.
mhm.
Anti
Yeah. It's
tipping.
kind of like
Sorry, whoops. Who said that?
anti what?
I'm like, yo, pay these minimum wage workers, pay them livable wages. Like, why do I got pay? Why I got subsidized? They wage. That's terrible. I love our waitresses though. I ain't tipping at a takeout place though. You heard it first. Look. Come at me in the comments. Come at me. You ain't paying my wages.
I, I ain't gonna lie. When they flip that little screen around to me, and I'm like ordering coffee, and I got to do the tip, I try to make sure they're not looking. I go, no tip, because it's just coffee. I'm pouring it myself. You just give
Yeah.
me an empty cup.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think this was a good continuation of our conversation, and it was a nice little sort of bow on it. And I think obviously the conversation and the discussion started talking about NIMBYism, and we've gotten into some of the more political underpinnings, if you will, of what fuels the NIMBYist politics. And it was actually pretty interesting to actually look at a project that both me and Jamar at least are very familiar with. So this is good recording. We are out of time, and thank you all for joining us on the stoop. We'll catch you all on the next one. Peace.
Hey X, you better be here next time.
Phantom.
everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of AutoBlack. If you have enjoyed the discussion, please hit that subscribe button or follow button, whatever you'd like. AutoBlack is a discussion-based podcast that is unapologetically Black at the intersection of design and culture. We acknowledge that our experiences are just that, our experience, but your voice is worth elevating and your perspective is valid. So please join the conversation and connect with us on Instagram at AutoBlack_podcast, or email us your thoughts, comments, and even future topics you'd like us to discuss on the stoop at AutoBlackPodcast@gmail.com. AutoBlack out. Bye!